All right, so let's talk about Market Curly. Not many companies can honestly say they changed how millions of people live their day-to-day lives. But Market Curly, it's one of them. This wasn't just about selling groceries. No, it was way bigger than that. They delivered a full-blown revolution packed in a purple box right to your doorstep before you even woke up.
I mean, just let that sink in for a second. That's a huge statement to make. We're not talking about just another popular app or service here. Insiders say that Curly literally split the history of Korean retail in two, before Curly and after Curly. It became this massive cultural thing, and it was all built on a pretty simple idea: the best quality food delivered with crazy convenience.
But, and this is where the story gets really interesting, how did that perfect unicorn myth just crumble? You have this celebrated unicorn company, the talk of the town, and suddenly it's teetering on the edge of collapse. So what on earth happened? How does a company that literally redefined an entire market end up fighting just to stay alive? Well, that's exactly what we're about to get into.
Okay, so like any great story, Curly's has a pretty amazing origin. And get this, the whole concepts that made them famous, that dawn delivery idea, it was actually pitched to a huge established retail company first. And they shot it down, just flat out said no. Their thinking was, how could that possibly be profitable?
But the founder, Kim Sol-ah, she saw something they didn't. And you have to understand her background. This wasn't just some random person. She was an elite consultant. We're talking Goldman Sachs, McKinsey, but she was also a busy working mom. So for her, this wasn't just a business problem, it was a personal one. And she basically said, fine, if nobody else is going to build this for me, I'll build it myself. And that's really where the Curly legend kicks off.
So her formula for winning? It sounds simple, but the execution was everything. First, extreme freshness. She personally curated the food. If it wasn't the absolute best, it didn't make the cut. Simple as that. Second, she was obsessed with her customers. I mean, tracking every single complaint, every bit of feedback. And then, the masterstroke, dawn delivery. Think about it. Delivering when the streets are empty isn't just a huge plus for the customer, it's also way, way cheaper logistically for the company. And wow, did the market respond? Instantly. Curly's growth wasn't just fast, it was absolutely explosive. It started as this kind of niche service for well-off professionals in Seoul, and before you knew it, it was a household name across the entire country. The speed of that growth was just staggering. It took off right from the start, but then the pandemic hit, and that's when things went into the stratosphere. Revenue just skyrocketed, hitting over 1.5 trillion won. It really seemed like nothing could stop them.
And at its absolute peak, investors were valuing the company at a mind-blowing 4 trillion won. That's around $3 billion US. It was the poster child, the perfect unicorn success story that everyone was celebrating. But behind that incredible number, there was a massive, massive problem just hiding in plain sight. Because underneath all that shiny unicorn hype, a fatal flaw was baked right into the business model.
And here's the kicker, the absolute crucial point. For all that success, all that revenue, all that cultural buzz, Market Curly had never, not once, made a single cent of profit. It was a cash-burning machine that just looked like a growth engine.
In fact, by the time it hit its peak valuation, its total losses had piled up to almost 1 trillion won. I mean, that's a shocking number. And for a while, investors were totally fine with it. They were willing to just look the other way, all for the sake of growth. This put the company in a state that finance folks call capital erosion. And what that means in simple terms is that it had burned through all of its own capital. The only thing keeping it alive was a constant drip of money from new investors. Without that lifeline, it was basically insolvent.
Now, the plan was always the same one you see with startups like this. Follow the path of giants like Coupon, grow like crazy, have a massive IPO, get a ton of cash, and then you finally figure out how to be profitable. But that dream, it was about to run headfirst into a brick wall of reality.
Because the world changed. That whole era of easy money, of zero interest rates that fueled this massive tech boom, well, it came to a screeching halt. And all of a sudden, investors didn't care about growth anymore.
the music stopped. And the only question anyone was asking was the one Curly had no good answer for. That's great, but how are you actually going to make money?
And when the funding dried up, the growth engine just seized up completely. Look at this. A perfectly healthy 30% growth in 2022 just collapses to 2% the very next year. That central belief, that myth, that endless growth would solve all the problems, it was shattered. The IPO was off the table, and a full-blown crisis had begun.
All of a sudden, the mission changed. It wasn't about revolutionizing retail anymore. It was just survival. Curly was now in a desperate, frantic fight just to keep its head above water.
And what did that mean? It meant changing the very soul of the company. The brand that was built on being this exclusive, premium curator of the best food, it started selling everything. Beauty products, clothes, electronics, you name it. It was becoming just another generic online store, and in the process, it risked losing the one thing that made it special in the first place.
So this was the new survival playbook, okay? First, chase higher profit margins. That's where Beauty Curly came from. Second, cut costs aggressively, everywhere. Salaries, their famous purple packaging, everything. And then, and this is never a good sign, they started paying their suppliers later and later, basically using them as a free bank loan. And on top of all that, they started talking about a creative new kind of profitability.
Yeah, they started claiming that they'd achieved EBITDA profitability. So you're probably asking, what the heck is that? Well, it's a way of measuring earnings that, let's say, conveniently, leaves out some pretty big expenses. Things like interest on their debt, taxes, and this is the big one, the cost of their huge warehouses and equipment wearing out over time. Critics basically call it a marketing trick, because once you add those very real costs back into the equation, yep, they were still losing a ton of money. So after this incredible rise and this really brutal fall from grace, where does that leave Market Curly? And where does it leave its visionary founder? To be honest, the future looks incredibly uncertain. And this really tells you everything you need to know about who is calling the shots now. After taking all that money just to stay alive, the founder, Kim Soo-la, owns less than 6% of the company she created. The other 94%? That belongs to financial investors. And you better believe they are sitting on huge paper losses and are desperate to get their money back. So really, it feels like there are only two paths left, and neither of them is great. Path number one, it survives, but as a kind of mediocre, generic online store, a shadow of what it once was. Or path number two, it just can't handle the pressure from competitors and all that debt, and it fades away, becoming just another footnote in e-commerce history. And that brings us right to the heart of the dilemma, doesn't it? Kim Soo-la's founding idea that quality comes before everything else, that was the company's greatest strength. It was its superpower. But now, for a company that's fighting for every single penny, that beautiful philosophy has become a luxury it might not be able to afford anymore. So it all comes down to this one big question. Was that quality-first vision a noble ideal that was just ahead of its time, or was it a fatal flaw from the very beginning? A beautiful, idealistic dream that was always going to shatter against the brutal reality of market economics? The final chapter for the Queen of Dawn delivery isn't written yet, but our story is one heck of a cautionary tale for today.